The crack of gunfire echoed across the Pinerest shooting range as Abigail Harris stood at the entrance, clutching her registration form. Her petite frame and unassuming presence seemed at odds with the testosterone-filled atmosphere of the exclusive club. As she approached the front desk, the conversations around her faded to hushed whispers and subtle snickers. A tall, imposing man with silver-streaked hair looked up from his conversation, his eyes narrowing as they settled on Abigail. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting she had wandered into the wrong building. His name tag read, Aiden Jenkins, President. If you've ever been underestimated because of your appearance, you'll understand what happens next in this remarkable story of hidden talent and justice served. "Yes, I'm here for the qualification round," Abigail replied, her voice steady despite the growing discomfort. "I registered online last week." She slid her confirmation across the polished mahogany counter, her neatly manicured nails contrasting with the calluses on her fingertips that no one seemed to notice. Aiden picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it might be contaminated, his eyebrows rising incrementally as he scanned the document. "Miss Harris, is it? I see you've signed up for the advanced division." His mouth curved into what could generously be called a smile, but his eyes remained cold. "That's our top-tier competition. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. We have a beginner's course that might be more appropriate for someone like yourself." The emphasis on "someone like yourself" hung in the air, heavy with implication. Around them, several men in expensive shooting gear exchanged knowing looks and poorly concealed smirks. Abigail's expression remained neutral, though something flickered behind her hazel eyes. "There's no misunderstanding. I've met all the qualification requirements as listed on your website," she said, simply. "I've paid the registration fee, submitted my background check, and fulfilled all prerequisites. I'd like to proceed with my scheduled qualification round." There was no challenge in her tone, just calm certainty that made Aiden's jaw tighten visibly. As the tension grew, an older man seated in the corner of the room glanced up from his coffee. Unlike the others, his weathered face showed no amusement at the scene unfolding before him. His attention caught on something gleaming at Abigail's collar, a military dog tag that had slipped from underneath her buttoned shirt. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, though he remained silent, watching with newfound interest. "Fine," Aiden finally conceded, with a dismissive wave. "Lane 15 is open. Don't expect any special treatment when you can't hit the broadside of a barn." Laughter rippled through the group of men as Abigail gathered her paperwork and walked toward the equipment area. As she turned away, the silver chain around her neck caught the light briefly, visible to the older man in the corner, whose gaze followed her with quiet contemplation. 10 years earlier, under the merciless summer sun of a military training facility, a younger Abigail Harris lay prone on scorching desert ground, her breath steady despite the heat shimmering around her. Through the scope of her rifle, she tracked a target barely visible to the naked eye, nearly 900 yards away. "Breathe, adjust, squeeze," came the quiet instruction from Captain William Daniels, her tactical shooting instructor. The crack of her shot split the air, followed seconds later by the metallic pang of a perfect hit. Not just a hit, a dead center strike that made even the most seasoned instructors raise their eyebrows. "That's her 5th consecutive bullseye at extreme range," William noted to his colleague, the surprise evident in his voice despite his professional demeanor. "I've never seen natural talent like this, especially not from someone who couldn't even hold the rifle properly 6 weeks ago." Abigail remained focused, recalibrating for her next shot, seemingly oblivious to the murmurs of astonishment behind her. Her journey to this moment had been anything but smooth. As one of only 3 women in the specialized tactical program, she had endured the quiet skepticism, the not-so-subtle suggestions that she couldn't cut it, the constant need to prove herself over and over while her male counterparts received immediate respect. The military had never been Abigail's planned career path. With a degree in mechanical engineering and a natural aptitude for precision systems, she had initially joined to develop targeting mechanisms. But an aptitude test revealed her extraordinary potential as a marksman. And despite her initial reluctance, she found herself redirected to the elite sniper program. The transition wasn't easy. Her slender frame struggled with the physical demands, and the psychological pressure was immense. But what her body lacked in brute strength, her mind compensated for with calculation, patience, and an almost supernatural ability to account for every variable, from wind speed to barrel temperature. Harris, Captain Daniels had said after her third week of training, when she had outshot instructors with decades of experience, "You have a gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." It was the first time anyone in the program had acknowledged her talent without qualification, without the unspoken "for a woman" hanging at the end of the sentence. By the end of her training, Abigail had broken 3 long-standing records and developed modifications to standard-issue rifles that were subsequently adopted by her entire unit. Her innovations and targeting systems eventually earned her commendations that remained classified to all but a select few. Now, a decade later, William Daniels sat in the corner of the Pinerest Shooting Club, watching his former star pupil being dismissed by men who couldn't dream of matching her skill. He'd recognized her immediately, despite the civilian clothes and the quiet demeanor that betrayed nothing of her military background. He wondered why she had chosen to keep her extraordinary abilities hidden, why she now worked as an accountant instead of leveraging her skills professionally. But he respected her enough to let her play this out her own way. If Abigail Harris wanted to remain anonymous, he wouldn't be the one to expose her. In the equipment room, Abigail methodically inspected the club-provided rifle, her fingers moving with practiced precision over each component. The weapon was high quality but not exceptional, certainly not customized to her preferences as her military firearms had been. Still, she made minute adjustments with the quiet confidence of someone intimately familiar with the mechanics. As she worked, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished gun cabinet glass, her face serious, focused, so different from the hesitant recruit she had once been. Sometimes she barely recognized herself from before the military, before she discovered what she was capable of. After her honorable discharge, Abigail had made a conscious choice to step back from the world of competitive shooting, the constant scrutiny, the pressure, the politics. She'd had enough of fighting to prove herself. She'd built a quiet life as an accountant, finding satisfaction in the precision of numbers rather than bullets. But something had drawn her back today. Perhaps it was seeing the Pinerest advertisement boasting about their next-generation targeting systems technology she recognized as derivative of her own designs. Or perhaps it was simply time to stop hiding a fundamental part of who she was. As she finished her preparations, Aiden Jenkins appeared at the doorway, leaning against the frame with casual arrogance. "Hey kid," he called out, making her look up. "If you want to stay and watch how real shooters perform, I could find something for you to do around here. Filing, maybe coffee runs. Women still need to know their place, don't they?" His smile didn't reach his eyes, which gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who believed they were firmly at the top of their hierarchy. Abigail didn't respond immediately. She simply turned back to the rifle, completed her final adjustments, and then faced him. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Jenkins," she said, with a politeness that masked the steel beneath. "I believe I'll just take my scheduled turn at the range instead." The look of mild surprise that crossed his face was small but satisfying. Clearly, he'd expected her to be intimidated enough to withdraw. Instead, she picked up the rifle with practiced ease and walked past him toward lane 15, leaving him momentarily speechless in her wake. The qualifying round at Pinerest was structured as a 3-tiered challenge designed to progressively test a shooter's abilities. Under increasingly difficult conditions, most newcomers failed at the second tier. Even experienced marksmen often struggled with the third. Abigail stood at her assigned lane, aware of the eyes watching her with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation of failure. She could almost feel their collective wish for her to embarrass herself, to reinforce their belief that someone like her didn't belong in their exclusive world. Aiden Jenkins stood prominently among the spectators, his arms crossed over his chest. Beside him was Gregory, mimicking his father's posture, both wearing identical expressions of smug expectation. "This should be entertaining," Gregory muttered, loud enough for his words to carry. $10 says she doesn't even hit the paper on the first shot." Several of the men chuckled in agreement, placing informal bets on how quickly and spectacularly Abigail would fail. The first-tier target was positioned at 100 yards, a warm-up distance for serious shooters, but challenging enough for beginners to struggle. Abigail took her stance, settling the rifle against her shoulder with practiced familiarity. She drew a steady breath, her mind automatically calculating variables that had become second nature through thousands of hours of training. The club members fell silent as she prepared to shoot, many leaning forward slightly in anticipation of the show they expected to witness. When Abigail pulled the trigger, the sound was almost anticlimactic. There was no dramatic recoil, no visible struggle with the weapon, just a clean, controlled shot. When the target was brought forward for inspection, the bullet hole was precisely through the center, a perfect shot that would have been impressive from anyone. From a supposedly amateur woman who'd been all but laughed out of the building minutes before, it was stunning. A murmur of surprise rippled through the onlookers. "Beginner's luck," Aiden dismissed, though his confident smile had faltered slightly. "The second tier will show her limitations." But the second tier, 3 shots at 200 yards with a crosswind simulation, yielded the same result. 3 perfect shots grouped so closely they formed a single ragged hole, rather than 3 distinct points of impact. The murmurs grew louder, the jokes ceased. By the time Abigail completed the third tier, a series of moving targets at varying distances, even the most skeptical observers had fallen silent, their disbelief palpable. William Daniels watched from the sidelines, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He recognized Abigail's technique, the economy of movement, the perfect balance of speed and precision that had made her legendary in certain military circles. She was holding back, he could tell, deliberately shooting well, but not extraordinarily, not revealing the full extent of her capability. It was enough to qualify, enough to earn grudging acknowledgement, but not enough to expose her real identity. "Who the hell is she?" one of the club members whispered to another as Abigail completed her final shot. "Nobody shoots like that without years of training, professional training." The question echoed through the group as they struggled to reconcile the unassuming woman before them with the exceptional skill she'd just demonstrated. Aiden's face had darkened considerably, his pride visibly wounded by this unexpected development. As Abigail set down the rifle and stepped back from the shooting position, Aiden approached her with forced cordiality. "Well, Miss Harris, that was surprisingly competent. You've qualified for the advanced division, though the competition itself is another level entirely." His tone suggested he still didn't consider her a genuine threat. "The preliminary round is next Saturday. Perhaps you'll want to reconsider your participation. The stakes and the pressure will be much higher." "I'll be here," Abigail replied, simply, the quiet certainty in her voice causing Aiden's smile to tighten further. As she turned to leave, she found her path blocked by Gregory Jenkins and 2 other club members, their expressions no longer amused, but wary, even hostile. "We checked backgrounds thoroughly for the advanced division," Gregory said, his voice low and challenging. "Strange that someone with your apparent skill level doesn't show up in any of the usual competitive circuits. Makes one wonder where exactly you learned to shoot like that." The implication was clear. They would be investigating her, looking for any reason to disqualify her before she could further disrupt their comfortable hierarchy. Before Abigail could respond, a grovelly voice cut through the tension. "I know exactly who she is." William Daniels had risen from his seat and was approaching the group, his weathered face serious but his eyes bright with something that might have been pride. All heads turned toward the older man, a respected figure at the club despite his preference for observing rather than participating in recent years. His gaze didn't leave the eagle insignia visible on Abigail's dog tags. "And I'm willing to stake my 40 years of reputation on her right to compete here." The week before the preliminary round hummed with tension at Pinerest. Abigail's qualification had upended the established hierarchy, with William's endorsement simultaneously protecting her position and intensifying scrutiny. Behind closed doors, Aiden Jenkins orchestrated a meticulous investigation into her background, frustrated by the classified nature of her military records. "Several of her files are restricted, unusual for a regular soldier," he told Gregory as they inspected the range. As a former Olympic alternate perpetually overshadowed by naturally gifted competitors, Aiden had built Pinerest as his personal kingdom, where his authority went unchallenged, until now. Meanwhile, Abigail and William reconnected at a quiet diner miles from the club. It was impulsive, she admitted, when he asked why she'd entered the competition without warning him. "Seeing my own design elements in their advertisement for the new tracking system just triggered something. After 10 years building a life where my gender doesn't make people question my competence, seeing my innovations showcased in a place that would dismiss me outright, I couldn't ignore it." Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as she added softly, "Maybe it's time to reclaim the part of myself I've hidden for too long." William understood the deeper meaning in her words. He'd witnessed her battles in the military, not just in combat zones, but against systemic biases and entrenched prejudices. "Jenkins won't make this easy," he warned. Having a woman, especially one without the right background, show him up would be intolerable to his ego. Saturday arrived with the preliminary round set to narrow 20 competitors to 8 finalists. The course was challenging, shooting at distances from 300 to 600 yards with variable wind conditions. Abigail's modest equipment stood in contrast to the expensive custom gear around her. As she checked in, the intercom crackled. "Abigail Harris, please report to the judges' table immediately. There appears to be an issue with your registration." Aiden and 2 officials waited with barely concealed satisfaction. "Mrs. Harris," Aiden began formally, "it has come to our attention that there may be irregularities with your qualification." He presented a folder containing redacted military records that questioned her disclosed experience level. "Competitors must disclose all relevant experience," another judge explained. "These documents suggest specialized training that should have been declared." Abigail examined the documents with outward calm despite her racing heart. "I followed the guidelines exactly. The form asked for competition experience and formal training courses. I have none in civilian competition. And my military classifications remain under security restrictions. I'm legally bound to respect." She met Aiden's gaze directly. There was no deception. William appeared at her side, his presence lending silent support. "As a founding member familiar with our bylaws, I can confirm that classified military service doesn't fall under the disclosure requirements as written." His reputation carried weight. The other judges shifted uncomfortably. Unwilling to concede, Aiden pressed another accusation. "There's also the matter of equipment modifications. Our inspection team noted unauthorized alterations to the club rifle during your qualification. This more serious charge could result in disqualification and banning." For the first time, indignation cracked Abigail's composed exterior. "That's simply not true. I made standard adjustments, sight alignment, stock positioning, nothing that violates regulations." Her direct challenge to Aiden's integrity heightened the tension palpably. William intervened again, his voice carrying decades of earned authority. "I observed the entire qualification. The modifications were within permitted parameters." His steady gaze confronted Aiden. "Are you suggesting my assessment as a certified range safety officer is an error?" After a tense silence, another judge awkwardly suggested moving forward with the competition. As Abigail turned to leave, Aiden made one final attempt to regain control. "If you're as good as you claim, you should have no objection to a special exhibition match on our new testing range with the digital monitoring system I just invested in. The most advanced precision tracking equipment available. No more arguments about qualifications, just pure skill for everyone to judge." The room fell silent, recognizing his challenge as both trap and opportunity. The new system would be calibrated to Aiden's specifications on unfamiliar ground, with maximum pressure. Yet it also offered a chance to end What he couldn't know was that Abigail hadn't just used advanced targeting systems. She had literally written the manual on the technology, forming the backbone of his prized new equipment. The exhibition match was scheduled immediately after the preliminary round, transforming a standard club competition into a highly anticipated showdown. Word spread rapidly, drawing rarely seen members and special guests to witness the confrontation. While other competitors prepared for their preliminary rounds, everyone understood the day's true highlight would come later. Abigail advanced through preliminaries with calculated restraint, qualifying fourth among 8 finalists, competent enough to advance, but deliberately not dominating. William observed for strategy from the sidelines, recognizing she was playing a longer game than Aiden could anticipate. As the regular competition concluded, Aiden commanded center stage with practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the room that held few women besides Abigail, "we have a special treat today. Pinerest has recently invested in state-of-the-art targeting technology, the most advanced civilian system available." Pride resonated in his voice as he gestured toward doors leading to a restricted section. "Today's exhibition will demonstrate this equipment's capabilities and settle questions about our newest competitor's qualification." All eyes shifted to Abigail, who stood quietly at the gathering's edge, her expression impassive. Aiden continued with unmistakable challenge in his tone. "Miss Harris will demonstrate her skills against mine on the new range. 5 shots at 800 yards with variable wind conditions. The system will analyze every aspect of performance. Trigger pressure, impact force, everything." His smile never reached his eyes. No room for interpretation, just objective data. The crowd followed Aiden to the new facility, a climate-controlled indoor range with sophisticated wind simulation technology and massive digital displays showing detailed target information. Even Abigail had to acknowledge the impressive setup, clearly representing significant investment. "You'll shoot first," Aiden directed with a gesture barely concealing his certainty of victory. "Standard preparation time, 5 consecutive shots. The system records everything automatically." He stepped back while technicians made final adjustments. Spectators positioned themselves behind safety barriers, many watching the monitoring screens that would display real-time results. Examining the provided rifle, Abigail noticed subtle adjustments designed to disrupt a shooter's rhythm. Slightly off-balance sight alignment, fractionally misaligned. Nothing immediately obvious, but enough to affect performance without careful correction. As she settled into position, she spotted something more concerning, a discrepancy in the wind speed indicators that most shooters would miss entirely. Having developed these systems herself, she immediately recognized the deliberate calibration error. The displayed wind conditions didn't match the actual air currents being generated. Anyone trusting the readouts would miss by inches. Rather than exposing the manipulation, Abigail mentally adjusted her calculations. Her first shot produced a perfect hit despite the challenging conditions, generating surprised murmurs throughout the room. Her second and third shots yielded identical results, landing precisely where intended despite the misleading environmental data. Aiden's expression darkened with each successful shot. By her fifth, which grouped so tightly with previous shots, they formed virtually a single whole. Amazed exclamations replaced murmurs. The digital readout confirmed what everyone witnessed. Abigail Harris had performed at a level few professionals could match. "Impressive," Aiden acknowledged stiffly, before taking his position, his movements betraying new tension. As he prepared, Abigail noticed a technician discreetly adjusting the control panel, resetting the system to display accurate wind readings for Aiden's turn. The manipulation was so blatant that several onlookers exchanged uncomfortable glances. William's expression hardened with disappointment, watching his old friend resort to such tactics. Even Gregory appeared uneasy with the obvious attempt to rig the competition. Despite shooting well, professionally competent but lacking Abigail's extraordinary precision, Aiden couldn't match her performance. When the system displayed overall results, the difference was undeniable. Tense silence fell as Aiden stared at the display, knuckles white around his rifle. Before he could diminish her achievement, Abigail stepped forward. "I believe there may be calibration issues with the system," she said clearly despite her soft voice. "The wind indicators displayed values that didn't match actual air conditions during my round." She turned toward the technician who had adjusted the settings. "Fortunately, I've had experience with similar systems and compensated accordingly." The implication hung clearly in the air. Aiden's face flushed with embarrassment as he recognized his predicament. "Technical glitches happen with new equipment," he dismissed. "We'll recalibrate before next weekend's finals." "I think we should have one final opportunity," Abigail suggested, her gentle tone belying the steel beneath, "with properly verified equipment and no interference. And I'll take the last shot." The challenge was unmistakable, a fair contest where skill alone would determine the outcome. Aiden hesitated, but with his reputation at stake before so many witnesses, he had little choice. "Fine," he agreed tersely. "One shot each, maximum distance, verified settings." He gestured toward William, grudgingly acknowledging the need for an impartial observer. "Captain Daniels will verify the equipment. Let's settle this once and for all." The range was reset for the final challenge. A single shot at 1,000 yards, the maximum the indoor facility could accommodate. This was extreme range shooting, the domain of elite specialists, where the slightest miscalculation meant complete failure. William Daniels personally verified every aspect of the system's calibration. His thoroughness left no room for manipulation. The gathered crowd fell silent in anticipation of what had become far more than a simple exhibition. "Ladies first," Aiden offered with forced courtesy, but Abigail shook her head. "I believe I requested the last shot. I'm content to wait." Something in her calm certainty visibly unsettled him, but he nodded stiffly and took his position. Aiden's preparation was meticulous as he calculated every variable before taking his shot. The room collectively held its breath until the impact registered. An excellent shot, landing within 2 inches of dead center. Appreciative applause followed as he stepped back, unable to hide his satisfaction. It was a shot few could equal, let alone surpass. He turned to Abigail with barely concealed triumph. "Your turn, Miss Harris. That's going to be difficult to beat." Abigail approached with the same quiet focus she'd maintained throughout the day. A strange hush fell over the room, not just silence, but weighted anticipation, as if everyone sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, each adjustment precise without being fussy. The economy of her actions spoke of thousands of hours refined into pure efficiency. William watched with Moore's pride, only fully understanding what Abigail was capable of. For years, her skills had been applied in war zones where precision wasn't measured in points, but in lives saved. This moment of recognition was long overdue. When Abigail finally squeezed the trigger, the shot seemed almost anticlimactic. A clean report followed by absolute silence as everyone turned to the digital display. For a moment, the system appeared to glitch, not immediately registering the impact. Then the results appeared and an audible gasp swept through the room. Her bullet had struck the absolute dead center of the target, a perfect shot at a distance most civilian shooters would consider nearly impossible. But it wasn't just the accuracy that stunned onlookers. It was the additional readings. The monitor displayed analytics about impact force and velocity exceeding the parameters the system was designed to measure. A warning flashed. Measurement limits exceeded. The shot had been so perfectly executed that it had essentially broken the tracking capabilities of the state-of-the-art system. As implications sank in, all eyes turned to Abigail, seeing her truly for the first time, not as an interloper, but as a master of her craft. Aiden stared at the monitor in disbelief, his earlier satisfaction evaporating before irrefutable evidence. This wasn't just a better shot than his. It demonstrated skill on a different level. Although this is a civilian adaptation with certain limitations compared to the military-grade systems, her understatement only emphasized the gap between her expertise and the assumptions made about her capability. "You designed this system?" Gregory asked incredulously. "Then why are you working as an accountant? Why aren't you competing professionally?" There was genuine confusion in his tone, the first time he'd addressed her without condescension. "When I left the service, I wanted a different life, one where I wasn't defined solely by my shooting abilities or military background. The accounting world values precision too, just in a different context." She glanced at William, a shared understanding passing between them. "But some skills never leave you, even when you set them aside for a while." The revelation transformed the atmosphere. Members who had previously dismissed Abigail now looked at her with newfound respect, even awe. Aiden alone seemed unable to process the dramatic shift, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally grudging recognition that he had severely misjudged both the situation and the woman at its center. The week following Abigail's extraordinary demonstration at Pinerest brought dramatic changes to the club's dynamics. The story had spread rapidly among members, growing with each retelling until it had taken on almost mythical proportions. Newer members regarded Abigail with undisguised admiration, while even the old guard found themselves reassessing their initial judgments. All except Aiden Jenkins, whose wounded pride had calcified into a rigid determination to reassert his authority. "This doesn't change anything about how the club operates," he insisted during an emergency board meeting called to address the situation. The boardroom was tense, divided between those who saw Abigail's presence as an opportunity and those who viewed it as a threat to tradition. "One exhibition match doesn't entitle her to special treatment or consideration beyond what any other member receives." His knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the polished table, betraying the control it took to maintain his composed facade. William Daniels, sitting opposite him as the board's most senior member, leaned forward with a patient expression of a man who had seen far too many battles fought over pride rather than principle. "No one is suggesting special treatment, Aiden, but we would be fools not to recognize the asset we have in Captain Harris. Her expertise with the very systems we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in could be invaluable to the club's future." The discussion continued in circles, with Aiden resisting any suggestion that might diminish his position or acknowledge Abigail's superior expertise. What he couldn't have known was that, at that very moment, Abigail was in the club's technical room at the invitation of several board members, examining the malfunctioning display system that her perfect shot had overwhelmed. The damage wasn't severe, but it had exposed flaws in the installation that could have eventually led to more significant failures. The calibration is off by about 3 degrees, she explained to the technicians who had initially been skeptical of her involvement, but now watched in fascination as she navigated the system's complex interface with easy familiarity. And the impact sensors are installed at the wrong depth. They're registering echo readings from the backstop material, which is throwing off your velocity calculations. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, making adjustments that the contracted installation team had claimed were impossible without returning the entire system to the manufacturer. By the time the board meeting concluded with a reluctant agreement to further agree to explore options regarding Captain Harris's potential contributions, Abigail had not only repaired the damaged system, but had enhanced its performance beyond the original specifications. The technicians were openly impressed, one of them admitting sheepishly that they'd been struggling with installation issues for months without finding solutions. "This system is actually capable of much more than what you're using it for," Abigail told them, her natural reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm as she discussed the technology she had helped develop. "With a few modifications, you could implement the advanced training protocols that were designed for the military version but omitted from the civilian release for cost reasons." She paused, considering the potential. "I could show you how to implement them if you're interested." When Aiden emerged from the boardroom, his mood already dark from the meeting's outcome, he was met with the sight of his technical staff gathered around Abigail in rapt attention as she explained complex ballistic calculations that would improve the accuracy of their training programs. His son Gregory stood among them, his earlier disdain replaced by undisguised interest as Abigail demonstrated a calibration technique none of them had seen before. "What's going on here?" Aiden demanded, his voice sharp with displeasure. "This area is restricted to authorized technical personnel only." The implied accusation that Abigail was somehow trespassing hung in the air, an increasingly desperate attempt to reassert control over a situation that had long since slipped from his grasp. Before Abigail could respond, the head technician stepped forward, his usual deference to Aiden tempered by newfound professional excitement. "Mr. Jenkins, Captain Harris has just saved us at least $20,000 in service calls. The system isn't just fixed, it's running better than it was installed. She's showing us modifications that the manufacturer charges premium consulting fees to implement." There was no missing the respect in his voice, or the implied criticism of Aiden's attempt to sideline someone with such valuable expertise. Aiden's face flushed, but before he could formulate a response, William appeared at his side, placing a calming hand on his shoulder. "Aiden, I think it's time for a private conversation," he said quietly, steering his old friend away from the gathered group. "About the future of Pinerest and the opportunities we're facing." Though resistance was evident in every line of Aiden's body, he allowed himself to be led away, perhaps recognizing that a public confrontation would only further undermine his position. In William's office, a space filled with trophies and memorabilia from a distinguished military and competitive shooting career, Aiden finally gave voice to the fear that had driven his behavior from the moment Abigail had walked into his club. "She's going to change everything," he said. The admission dragged from him reluctantly. "Everything I've built here, everything I've established, it will all be different if someone like her becomes the standard." William regarded him with a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. "Change is coming whether you fight it or not, Aiden. The question is whether you want to be remembered as the man who tried to hold back progress or the one who had the vision to embrace it." He gestured to the photographs on his wall, images of diverse shooting teams from his military days, men and women of various backgrounds united by shared excellence. The world of competitive shooting is evolving. Pinerest can evolve with it, or it can become irrelevant. The choice is yours. But I know which legacy I'd prefer to leave. As this conversation unfolded, Abigail found herself surrounded by club members eager to learn from her expertise. The initial suspicion had given way to genuine appreciation, especially among the younger members who cared more about skill than tradition. She answered questions patiently, demonstrated techniques when asked, and gradually revealed more of the passion for the sport that she had suppressed for so long. "Why did you really come back to shooting after all this time?" one of the younger women asked, voicing the question many had wondered, but few had dared to ask directly. The room quieted, attention turning to Abigail as she considered her response. "I never truly left it behind," she admitted after a thoughtful pause. "It's been part of who I am for too long, but I needed to find a way to engage with it on my own terms, not just as the female shooter or the military specialist. When I saw the advertisement for the new system here, technology I helped create being presented as the exclusive domain of real shooters, something just clicked. I realized I was tired of hiding my abilities to make others comfortable with their assumptions." Her honesty resonated with many present, especially those who had faced their own battles against preconceptions and stereotypes. The conversation might have continued in this reflective vein, if not for the sudden reappearance of Aidan and William, their expressions suggesting that significant decisions had been made. Aidan stepped forward, and for a moment, the old tension returned to the room. But when he spoke, his voice carried a resignation that gradually gave way to something approaching genuine respect. "Captain Harris, it has been brought to my attention that Pinerest would benefit greatly from your expertise. The board has approved the creation of a new position, technical director and advanced instructor, and we would like to offer it to you." The surprise that rippled through the gathering was nothing compared to Abigail's own astonishment. Of all the outcomes she had imagined when she walked into Pinerest that first day, this had never been among them. She glanced at William, who nodded slightly, encouraging her to consider the offer seriously. "This club has a proud tradition," Aidan continued, the words clearly difficult for him but delivered with growing conviction. "But traditions that don't evolve become relics. Pinerest should represent the best in marksmanship regardless of who demonstrates that excellence." He extended his hand, a gesture that cost him visibly in pride, but which he completed with unexpected grace. "We would be honored to have you join us in shaping the club's future." Abigail regarded him thoughtfully, recognizing the significant concession this represented. After a moment's consideration, she accepted his handshake, her grip firm and professional. "I would be interested in discussing the position," she said carefully, neither committing fully nor dismissing the opportunity outright, "particularly if it includes implementing a more inclusive training program for members of all backgrounds and experience levels." As conversations erupted around them, Abigail caught Gregory's eye across the room. The young man who had been so dismissive of her initially now regarded her with a complicated mixture of respect, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of healthy intimidation. He approached slowly, waiting until his father had moved away before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said simply, with a directness that suggested he might have more potential than his earlier behavior had indicated. "Made assumptions that were wrong, and I was disrespectful." "Sometimes," Abigail replied with a small smile, meeting his gaze directly, "people need to be reminded that true value doesn't come from what they see on the surface." It was a gentle rebuke, but also an invitation to look deeper, to question assumptions, to recognize excellence wherever it appeared. And for the first time since she had walked into Pinerest Shooting Club, Abigail felt fully present in both aspects of herself: the precise, disciplined military specialist and the thoughtful, determined woman who had forged her own path against formidable odds. 6 months transformed Pinerest Shooting Club almost beyond recognition. Where once the walls had displayed only fading photographs of the same circle of men celebrating the same traditional accomplishments, now a diverse array of images showcased achievement across many demographics. The membership had expanded by nearly 30%, with a notable increase in women and younger shooters drawn by the club's newly progressive reputation and cutting-edge training program. At the center of this transformation stood Abigail Harris, whose technical director position had evolved into something far more significant than anyone had initially envisioned. Her redesign of the training protocols had not only maximized the potential of the club's equipment, but had created pathways for shooters at all levels to improve their skills systematically. The advanced targeting system, now properly calibrated and enhanced beyond its original specifications, had become a draw for serious competitors from across the region. "We've received inquiries from 3 other clubs asking if you would consult on their installations," William told her, as they observed a group of new members working through a beginner's qualification course. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, not just for Abigail's accomplishments, but for the evolution of the institution he had helped found decades earlier. "And the National Association has expressed interest in your training methodology for their youth development program." Abigail watched as a young woman celebrated hitting her target consistently for the first time, the joy of achievement radiating from her face. "It's been rewarding to see people discover capabilities they didn't know they had," she replied, her normally reserved demeanor warming with satisfaction, especially those who might have been discouraged from even trying in the old environment. The most surprising development, perhaps, had been Aiden Jenkins' gradual but genuine acceptance of the new direction. After the initial adjustment period during which he had struggled visibly with his diminished authority, he had found an unexpected niche as the club's historian and ambassador. His extensive knowledge of competitive shooting's traditions and evolution made him valuable in connecting the club's past with its future, particularly with older members who might otherwise have resisted change. Today marked a significant milestone, the official opening of Pinerest's new training center specifically designed for women and youth shooters. The spacious facility incorporated Abigail's insights about creating accessible entry points for newcomers while maintaining pathways to the highest levels of proficiency. As members and guests gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the atmosphere buzzed with an energy that would have been unimaginable in the exclusionary environment of 6 months prior. Abigail stood at the podium, the eagle insignia on her dog tags visible now without concealment, a symbol of the integration of her past and present. William stood proudly at her side, the mentor who had recognized her potential when others saw only limitations. As she prepared to address the gathering, she caught sight of Aiden making his way through the crowd, accompanied by a middle-aged woman whom Abigail recognized from photographs as his wife, a presence notably absent from club functions in the past. "Before we officially open this new facility," Abigail began, her voice carrying clearly without needing to be raised, "I want to acknowledge that this moment represents far more than a physical expansion of Pinerest. It represents an expansion of possibility, a recognition that excellence in marksmanship isn't defined by gender, background, or conformity to tradition, but by dedication, precision, and respect for the discipline." Her gaze swept across the diverse faces before her, longtime members who had initially resisted her presence, now standing alongside newcomers who might never have found a place in the old Pinerest. "The skills we develop here, focus, patience, technical mastery, extend far beyond the range. They teach us to look past superficial judgments, to value substance over appearance, to recognize that true ability often comes from unexpected sources." As Abigail concluded her remarks and ceremonially cut the ribbon, thunderous applause filled the space. Members surged forward to explore the new facility, exclamations of appreciation echoing as they discovered the thoughtful design elements and innovative training stations. In the midst of the celebration, Gregory Jenkins approached Abigail, his expression serious but no longer hostile. "My father would like a word if you have a moment," he gestured toward where Aiden stood, slightly apart from the crowd, his posture suggesting he was still not entirely comfortable in the new Pinerest he had helped create. Abigail nodded, making her way through well-wishers to join the former club president in a quiet corner of the facility. "Congratulations," Aiden offered, the word simple but delivered with a sincerity that would have been unthinkable during their first encounter. "What you've built here is impressive. More than impressive, it's necessary." He hesitated, then added with surprising candor, "I was wrong about many things, Abigail. Not just about you specifically, but about what Pinerest could become, about who belongs in this world." The admission clearly cost him, but there was also a visible unburdening in his expression, the relief of a man who had finally set down a heavy weight he'd carried too long. My wife has decided to take up shooting, he continued, nodding toward the woman who was now examining one of the training stations with evident interest. She's been wanting to for years, apparently, but never felt welcome in the old environment. I'm grateful that's changed. Before Abigail could respond, they were interrupted by a television crew, one of several media outlets covering the opening, as part of a growing national interest in more inclusive approaches to traditionally male-dominated sports. As the reporters set up for an interview with Abigail, Aiden stepped back, yielding the spotlight with a graciousness that represented perhaps his most significant personal growth. "Captain Harris," the reporter began, "6 months ago you walked into this club as an outsider and were famously told to step aside. Today you're cutting ribbons and setting national standards. What would you say to other women facing similar barriers in traditionally exclusive spaces?" Abigail considered the question thoughtfully, the cameras capturing the quiet confidence that had replaced her former need for anonymity. "I would tell them that expertise speaks for itself when given the opportunity to be demonstrated," she said finally, "and that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply to excel so dramatically that the barriers become irrelevant." As the day's celebrations continued, William found Abigail alone for a moment, observing the activity from a slight distance with characteristic thoughtfulness. "When you walked into Pinerest that first day, did you imagine it would lead to all this?" he asked, gesturing to the transformed club around them. Abigail smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that had become more frequent as she embraced her whole self without reservation. "Honestly, I was just tired of hiding what I could do," she admitted. "I never planned to change Pinerest. I just wanted to claim my own place in it on my own terms. And instead, you've created space for countless others to do the same," William observed with satisfaction. "Sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest acts of authenticity." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the new training range, Abigail watched a young girl take her first coached shot under the guidance of a female instructor, a scene that would have been impossible in the Pinerest of 6 months prior. The girl's expression of concentration, followed by delighted surprise when she hit her target, radiated Abigail's own journey from reluctant recruit to confident expert years before. In that moment, standing amid the community she had helped reshape through nothing more than insistence on her right to demonstrate her abilities, Abigail realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the technical innovations or the institutional changes. It was the simple, powerful example she had set, that true value doesn't come from conforming to expectations or appearances, but from the courage to bring your full self. What did you think of this story? If you've ever been underestimated or faced barriers because of assumptions about who you are, share your experience. How did you overcome those challenges? Remember, sometimes the most powerful statement is simply refusing to be limited by others' perceptions.